that shore, free from all care. Rising up in the sky, telling this world goodbye. Homeward we then will fly, glory to share. My Jesus is coming soon, morning or night or noon, then he will meet here. Ryan. Trumpet will surely sound all of the day. Ryan. Righteous meet in the sky, going where no one died, heavenward bound. And on page, it is a song I'm singing today. I'm redeemed. I'm redeemed. Trouble and sorrow have vanished away. I have been redeemed. Yes, I'm redeemed. I love divine. Glory, glory, Christ is mine. Christ is mine. All to him I now resign. I have been redeemed. Great is my joy. Now as onward I go, I'm redeemed. Yes, I'm redeemed. All the way homeward, my praises shall flow. I have been redeemed. Precious indeed is my Savior to me. I'm redeemed. Yes, I'm redeemed. Happy in glory, someday I shall be. I have been redeemed. Precious indeed is my Savior to me. I'm redeemed. I'm redeemed. Someday I shall be. I have been redeemed. Yes, I'm redeemed. I love divine. Glory, glory, Christ is mine. Christ is mine. Well, all to him I now resign. I have been redeemed.
Amen.
And church, place you on the highest place. For you, Lord, are the great high priest. We place you, Lord, high above all hell, all hell, as we come to and worship at your feet. on the highest place. For you, Lord, are the great high priest. We place you, Lord, high above all hell, as we come and worship at your.
Amen. Let us go to God in prayer. Gather, assemble, study of thankful you have done. And many blessings. Pray, my standing, to study your word and pray that we all around. Continue build up this. Father, we go. Father, we ask, my be with those that are sick, restore them to proper health. Father, we just pray that all will grow in knowledge of your word. Forgive us now for all our sins. All these we ask in Christ's name.
Amen. Amen. Good evening. Good to see you all this evening. Tonight we're at 1 Corinthians, Brother Gordon, chapter 14. Brother Gordon has been mentioned in this verse. We are looking at the women and can they preach in church? They remain silent. What does it mean to remain silent? That's what we're looking at this evening. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse number 34. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse number 34. Let the women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but let them subject themselves just as the law also says. I want us to back up a little bit and read the verse again, but this time we're going to start in verse number 32. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. As in all the churches of the saints, let the women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but let them subject themselves, just as the law also says. If we look at this verse, it says clearly, verse 34, that women are to what? Keep silent in the church. Paul, in this context, is discussing in chapter 14 the speaking in tongues and prophesying. Am I right? Speaking in tongues and prophesying. And what he's discussing, evidently, is taking place within the church, the formal worship service. And obviously, from the text, there were some women that was prophesying in the church, and Paul says, let these women, ought not to be so, but let them keep what? Silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak. If you go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse number 2. begin there. So the church, the letter to the church in Corinth was written by Paul to correct a number of things that were happening within the church. Am I correct so far? They had all kinds of problems that they were doing, all kinds of things that they were doing that was not in line with keeping with what God required or God commanded them to do. So, and one of the issues that they were having was the issue of speaking in tongues, prophesying, how they use their spiritual gifts, how they deal with a brother who was saying, how you take a brother to court, all of those things that they were dealing, and many more that they were dealing with in the church in Corinth. And it is, people always say the church in Corinth seemed like that church that was filled with problems, of all kind of problems, all kind of things happening, and Paul was addressing some of these issues. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, let's begin at verse 2. I praise you because you remember me in everything, and hold firm to the tradition just as I delivered them to you. But I want to understand that Christ is the head of every man, and the man is the head of a woman, and God is the head of Christ. So what, in this context, he's establishing what? Authority, right? And so he's establishing authority as it ought to be, as laid out by God. So Christ is the head of every man. The man is the head of woman, and God is the head of Christ, right? So the man has the authority, is the authority figure over the woman. Just there. All right? Now, some women may not want to hear that, but it's right there. Am I right, brother? It's right there. All right? And so, verse 4, every man who has something on his head while praying or prophesying disgraces his head. But every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying disgraces her head, for she is one and the same with her whose head is shaved. Now, we're not looking at the matter today of what? Head covering. That's another subject for another time. But what we are looking at is there was a problem in Corinth where women obviously were praying and prophesying, verse 5, while her head was what? Uncovering. What am I getting at? It seems, and some would say, as they look at 1 Corinthians chapter 14, that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, that Paul is not condemning the women praying and prophesying in the church. Because he's regulating in chapter 11 how they ought to pray and prophesy in the church. Right? If you call it, it's in the church. Right? So there is a praying and prophesy in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 that women were doing. Are we seeing that? And there's in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, he's telling them that they ought to remain silent. It sounds as if there's a contradiction. Huh? Doesn't sound that way. It does sound that way. As if there is a contradiction. In chapter 11, he's saying they are praying and prophesying. In chapter 14, he's saying that they ought to remain silent. So, Brother Brian, you said it can't sound that way. Is it contradicting? Why you say it's not contradicting? What is your understanding? And remember now, on one hand it's saying what? That they are praying and they are prophesying. And on the other hand he's saying they should remain silent. All right, yes, Brother Brian.
So in 1 Corinthians 11, he does not speak against the praying and prophesying, but
Yes.
How they go about doing it.
Right.
So, and you say we'll speak about that another time.
Yes.
Prayer and prophesy. So in 1 Corinthians 14, in the context when you backed up and read from verse 32, the keeping silence is in terms of being in authority when praying and prophesying over the entire church, which would include the men.
So your interpretation would allow the women to
Pray and prophesy
in the church.
by themselves, without the men.
Okay. you see that in 1 Corinthians 14.
And I was not in 14.
Okay.
In 14 it says keep silent.
Okay.
But
Where are you?
when you take it in conjunction with 11, they are not told not to pray and prophesy.
That's what I'm saying. They are
Right.
not told in 11 not to pray and prophesy, because they are allowed to pray and prophesy in 11. But in 14, it is silencio.
So that means there must be situations where they can pray
But
and prophesy.
is it in chapter 11, is this within the church that they are praying and prophesying,
Oh.
as in chapter 14?
It doesn't state that it's in the congregation.
That verse 16 says, but if one is inclined to be contented, we have no other practice, nor the churches of God. Yes, Sister God, not hearing you. Okay? Brother, really have anything to say? No. Brother Gordon? Yes. You better go and have a mic beside you. And two more mics. Yeah.
When we are studying the Bible, we can't just take
The mic is on?
yes, yeah. In First Corinthians, in First Timothy 2 and verse 12.
I don't want us to get the first about the
No,
two.
listen,
Let me
listen.
tell you why I don't want us to get there.
Yes,
Right? We're at 1 Corinthians chapter 11.
yes.
So somebody comes to Brother Gordon and says in 1 Corinthians 11 verse 5, he said the woman can pray and prophesy. Right? What is your understanding of the context of 1 Corinthians chapter 11 as to, don't go to Timothy yet, as to, the Brother Gordon,
Yeah. I'm
don't go to
hearing you.
Timothy as there.
Yeah.
As to why in this context, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11,
Mhm.
he's saying the prophecy is okay for the woman. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, just a couple verses more, chapters more, he's saying what? Be silent.
Yes.
Now, first of all, we have to take out of our mind that when the book was written, it was divided into chapters and verses.
Right.
It was never written in chapters and verses. We get the chapters and the verses because in our modern day English, in order for us to understand the context easier, the interpreters divided it into chapters
Yeah.
and verses.
All right.
Huh? And for easy reference. But generally, in the original manuscript, it's just one straight letter. One letter. All right, so if we write one letter to the Corinthians, and the part of the middle of the letter is saying that the woman should remain, can prophesy and pray, and then the other part, look, just a few more pages over them, he's saying that they cannot, but should remain silent.
Yeah, but you're talking about 1 Corinthians 14 now.
I'm talking about both of them. How do you reconcile the
Yes,
fact that in
because-
chapter 11, he's saying you can,
Yes.
as a woman.
Right.
In chapter 14, he's saying, let's make it easier. I'm not the chapter. So in the parts of the letter, the same letter to the Corinthians, he's saying, women can prophesy. He said, women are prophesying and praying. And the next part, a few pages over, he's saying that they should be silent.
Yes.
So what verses are saying is that because he's allowing them in chapter 11, then they see nothing wrong with them, with women preaching and praying, if they do it a certain way.
All right.
Right.
Okay. So when we look at chapter 11, is a broad statement.
Mhm.
He said he accepts the woman can prophesy and pray. In chapter 14,
No, so you're saying in chapter 11, he's
Yeah.
accepting
yeah,
that the woman can,
yes,
okay,
can pray. In chapter 14,
Mhm.
he was dealing with a specific subject. We're talking about speaking in tongues and prophesy.
Mhm.
And so he was saying, because of the confusion that was created, he was saying the woman must keep silent.
Mhm.
Right?
So there's no confusion with that.
It's not a contradiction.
So what if there's no confusion?
Huh?
What if there's no confusion? What if the women are speaking in a timely manner? So the men prophesy and the women prophesy after.
Yes, but look now. At first Timothy is that there's a
The first
qualification.
reach out Timothy.
Yes.
I want us to understand.
Remember how you had said it.
No, I want us to understand
Yeah.
1 Corinthians chapter 11
Yeah.
and 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Then we go to Timothy.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want us to jump.